Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday morning in the middle of winter. We really appreciate you being here. This is a collaboration between the Essex County Community Foundation and MassCreative. It's the beginning of 5 workshops that ECCF is putting on through the Creative County Initiative, which I'll tell you a little bit about, over the next 5 months. This is the first one that we've done. So the Essex County Community Foundation, about 3 years ago, was invited by the Barr Foundation in Boston, which is a big family foundation, to receive $500,000 for the last 2 years in funding so that we, through the Community Foundation, could invest in the arts and culture sector of Essex County. Essex County is 34 communities, the whole Merrimack Valley, all the way down to Saugus, and it represents about 800,000 people. So this was a first for the Essex County Community Foundation, which had not specifically invested in arts and culture initiatives before. So 3 years ago they said, yeah, we'd love $500,000, and we did some surveying around the county to find out where we would invest that money, plus another $250,000 that we raised through the foundation. And what we looked at was the needs in the county. We did some surveys and some focus groups, and we identified that there was a need to connect among the organizations themselves, between artists and arts organizations, and importantly, between the arts and culture organizations and the communities that they serve so well, the municipalities, the cities and towns, and the business sector. So we started having convenings and bringing together people in as many ways as we could think of, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we focused on in those 2 years. We also heard that expanded resources, of course, we all know that we all need money, and we all need spaces to make art and to present art and to rehearse and all of those things. And we need leadership in this area too. So this is a focus of ours in the last 2 years and going forward. Education and training. So this is the first time that we have actually reached out to you, the arts and culture organizations and arts administrators and artists in the county to provide that really specific education and training through these capacity building workshops. And then we also found that there was a need for more art in the public eye so that we could raise the visibility and perceived value of art in our communities. We focused on public art and placemaking projects over the last 2 years. So we had the 2 convenings, and many of you were there, the 2 Arts and Culture Summits in 2018 and 2019 at the Cabot Theater. We had over 700 people attend those all total. And we launched the Essex County Creates calendar. You'll hear from John Andrews today, who is our manager of that calendar. It was the first time that we've had a regional county-wide way for your events and your news to reach other people from Newburyport to Lawrence to Saugus and Middleton and everybody in between. So that has been a building project for us over the last 2 years. We had last winter, we had a series of cultural planning labs or workshops where we introduced the idea of cultural planning to our municipal leaders, our town managers, city and town planners, community development directors. And now they are all aware of the need and what happens when you include arts and culture in planning in our communities, alongside planning for housing, transportation, schools, infrastructure, and all of the rest. And the reason we all know in this room is because having an arts and culture vibrancy in a community is what creates economic development. It's what creates a sense of belonging, a sense of place, and all of those things that make us all want to live and work in the communities where we live and work. So but planning for that, doing what municipalities can do in terms of taxes and zoning and all of those things are something that we wanted to introduce to the powers that be in our communities. So we had those 4 labs. Coming out of those labs, just to go back for a second, we are undertaking currently a project up in the Merrimack Valley with the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission over the next several months to map the arts and cultural assets in that 15-town and city area of the Merrimack Valley. This is a pilot program. We have retained an expert who's an expert in cultural planning, Tom Borup, and we have hired Marquise Victor from Elevated Thought as our artist partner to bring this forward and do mapping of not only the places and spaces where arts and culture happen in those 15 communities, but to bring together convenings of people from the whole community to let us know what is important, what is the meaning of living in Merrimack or Newburyport or Lawrence, what does it mean to you to be there, and trying to map those stories and historical facts and future goals and things like that. So it's hitting on both levels, not only just the digital mapping, but also bringing people together to map the meaning of being in our communities. And then we funded 12 public art and creative placemaking projects. All of these are on our eccf.org website, and we have just wrapped up that. These were all 2-year projects. We've just wrapped them up. In terms of media, which is the topic of today, I'd encourage you to look at what 2 of them have done in particular. One is Curious City, which is based here in Peabody, which was undertaken by a wonderful collaborative of private and public and nonprofit, including Northeast Arc, which is where we are today as a major partner. That what they did for media, and if you look at their Facebook site, what they did for and continue to do for media outreach is very creative, remarkable, and it has really been the underpinning of their success of that project. It was a pop-up children's museum, which is now becoming a permanent children's museum here in downtown Peabody, and I think their media outreach was a big part of their success in that. The other one I want to flag for you is Ride the Switch in Ipswich. Carrie Bates is here as one of the organizers of that, and what they have done on their social media platforms has been remarkable, and just the energy behind that is worth checking in on. So anyway, those are just 2. Going forward, we have the next 3 years, we have been refunded by the Barr Foundation. They are going to be infusing another $1 million in Essex County for the next 3 years through the Essex County Community Foundation. We plan to raise another $300,000 to supplement that funding, and these are the areas that we're going to be investing in the next 3 years. Capacity building, we're here today as the first of those. There'll be 2 series of capacity building workshops, one this spring and another one in about a year from now. We welcome your feedback, too, always on what's important to you. We'll be sending out a survey like later today to you. Please, it's really short, but please feedback to us what is important to you in these capacity building workshops as we go forward. One of the things coming out of this, too, to also flag the survey, we decided to not just have you walk away today with your folders, with the information, with your inspiration that you get from the speakers and call it a day. We have opened up the opportunity for a limited number of you to let us know if you're interested in a subsequent follow-up session to dive deeper into the issues that are flagged today for your own organization or for yourself as an artist. So that's in the survey. If you're interested in a follow-on session with up to 10 organizations working together for 2 or 3 hours, like a half a day, sometime later this spring with an expert in this area, that's what we're going to be offering you to sort of extend the impact of these kinds of sessions. Other things, you'll hear about what John Andrews is doing for the next couple of years in communications and connectivity through the Essex County Creates site and others. Collaborative projects, we do have a new grant round open. It opened up on New Year's Day. If you look at eccf.org/grants, there's another round of partnership grants that's now open for letters of interest, which are due February 15th. Cultural planning, as I said, we're continuing that effort with the project up in the Merrimack Valley right now. We intend to extend that through the whole county eventually over the next 3 years, so we're kind of ambitious. And then the convenings. We will have another Arts and Culture Summit in 2021. So, that said, I want to thank, before we go any further, thank Northeast Arc and the Black Box Theater for hosting us today. Very amazing space here. It's just, I hope you all can use it in the future as well. Northeast Arc, too, as an organization, is just amazing. You can see what they do with all kinds of, the entire community, challenged community and everybody with the offerings that they have in art and chair caning and specific skills development that they do here. It's an incredible project. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Tracie. Tracie from MassCreative. Here she is.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to set my timer so that I stay on time. So I'm Tracie Konopinski. I work as the program director with MassCreative. And I wanted to do a little bit of introduction to our work for people who don't know us, and kind of set the stage for how we approach advocacy work. So you probably know us as the statewide arts advocacy organization. We really believe in the power of arts and culture. Obviously, I don't need to tell you that, but there's so many benefits to arts and culture, from building our economy to building our education system to building vibrant and connected communities, and we think that everyone should have access to that, regardless of where they grow up or what zip code they live in, where they get their paycheck, and that everyone should be able to access that and participate in it. But to do that, we need to advocate. It's not a given. It's not everyone believes what we do in our heart of hearts, so we have to do the work to convince people. Our approach to advocacy is kind of three-pronged. One is that we do public education. We also do advocacy, and we do something called organizing. So when I talk about public education, this is just about telling stories. We know that there's so many great things happening here in Essex County and across the state. Sometimes it winds up in the paper, in the arts and culture section, but we think that arts and culture should be on the front page with all these other issues. So it's not just this thing that's marginalized into this dying section of a dying paper. Can we use the mic so that we see that? Yes, absolutely. The second is advocacy.
Just so that you can take this out of the
yeah, I'm a mover.
I know, you can move.
This is really about asking for what we need as a creative community. It's not just, it's more than just hoping that we can get scraps. It's more about asking, here's what we need to thrive. It's not just what we think we're going to get. And then the last piece is around organizing. And this is all about building political power. So it's about bringing people together to take action so that our voices are louder and that we're getting the attention of people who actually make the decisions. So to talk a little bit more about public education, this is just a snapshot of the great work that we've been able to do with Susan, who you'll hear from after me, on being able to get arts and culture not just in the arts and culture section of the paper, but on the front page. So you can see some of the hits that we've gotten over the past really just year and a half. The second place is around engaging on social media. So folks may know of this event that we do every year called Arts Matter Day. It's an online day of action. And so it's not just about telling stories from theater companies like Company One, but it's getting that message into people who actually make decisions, like Mayor Walsh, the mayor of Boston, and Rep. Andy Vargas as well. So advocacy, this is about asking for what we need. So in your folders is MassCreative's policy platform. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about it, and then you can always talk to me about more of the actual campaigns that we're working on. So this is our policy platform for this year. We take this as the approach of arts and culture brings a lot of benefits. And so we start there and then develop our program and the campaigns that we work on. So one is that arts and culture helps to build happy and healthy people. So we should be connecting arts and culture to folks who, to vulnerable populations or people who need the health and wellness benefits of arts and culture. Anyone from veterans to young people dealing with mental health issues, and just an everyday person. The next piece is around equal access and opportunities for arts and culture. So this is where all of our work to build the resources for the creative community, whether it's state funding or municipal funding, this is where this falls. Connected communities. So we want to make sure that the folks who we're working with are representative of the folks in Massachusetts, and that we're bringing people together who may not often interact, so that we're building more vibrant communities. Access to a well-rounded education for students. We think every child should have access to arts education in school and out of school, again, regardless of what zip code they live in or where their parents get their paycheck. So we're helping to make that happen. And then the last is respect and support for a creative workforce and economy. Creative workers are workers. Creative businesses are businesses. And we want to make sure that there's tools and resources and state support to help artists really thrive. So this is a little bit more about our advocacy platform. And then the last piece is around organizing. So this is the idea that there's lots of different power structures, that from the grass tops level, from institutional leaders down to the average theater goer, that those people have voice. And when you bring them together to take action, it's a lot more powerful in talking to decision makers when it is organized. So the way that we organize the field, as we say, is we have over 400 member organizations. So these are anything from large institutions like the Peabody Essex Museum to MassMocha, down to community arts organizations that work with young people. So it's through these organizations that we do a lot of our outreach, because it's through these organizations that you can get board members, staff members, and audience members to reach out to their decision makers and help to build that power. And then this last piece is around just individual advocates in the field. So we've been able to grow our email list through our member organizations so that when we hold an event, we turn out hundreds of people. And that, again, helps to build the impact that we're telling the story, that we're a creative community, we're organized, there's a lot of us, and you're going to hear from us. So that's our approach to advocacy. And we've done a pretty good job in the 7 years that we've been around. So in terms of public funding for the arts, we've helped to increase state investment in the creative community through the Mass Cultural Council and the Cultural Facilities Fund by almost $59 million. So it's over an 80% increase, which is a big deal. I mean, it is. Arts education for every child. So we've worked with a coalition called Arts for All of state education leaders to convince state education officials that arts education should be central to a curriculum for every child. And so that is influencing measures across the state. Public education, voter engagement. So we think building great arts champions in the State House and the City Hall starts around elections and with voter education. So if voters are asking candidates to talk about arts and culture, and candidates know that individuals care about those issues, it's going to become a part of the conversation during the elections, and then that will influence how they act when they're in office. So we've worked on these Create the Vote campaigns in dozens of communities across the state. And then we've helped to build these connected grassroots networks all across the state. So I think people really look to MassCreative for information on what's happening in the State House and in city halls. They look to us for when to take action, and to help us network. They look to us to help network folks with other people who are doing great work and can collaborate. So that's us. In terms of what you can do in engaging in advocacy, we know that advocacy is a little bit of a scary word, and that lobbying gets a little terrifying, especially if you're a nonprofit. So we want to help dispel those myths and say, hey, there's a lot that you really can do, and it's very simple information on what you can't do. So I like to say that there's 3 types of advocacy. There's personal advocacy, when you're advocating for yourself. There's organizational advocacy, and when you're advocating for your organization. And then policy advocacy. So personal advocacy, I'll tell my story. If I were to advocate for myself, I would say, hey, I'm a dancer, and the arts have made a big difference in my life. Organizational advocacy, so I take classes at the dance complex. So I would say, hey, the dance complex makes an impact in the Cambridge community. And then if I were to take it to the next level, I would say, hey, arts and culture are public goods, they're worthy of public investment, and the state should create a dedicated revenue stream so that all of this work can happen. So there's multiple levels. What we really focus on is the policy advocacy, and what we want to get folks more familiar with. So in terms of policy advocacy, there's a bunch of different realms. One is just doing research. 2 is public education, also working on voter education, and then the scary word lobbying. So research is anything from writing a white paper about arts and culture and public health, helping to push out data, helping to push out case studies. All of us do this, right? Public education, so this is anything from educating the community on issues, your neighbor, your uncle, and educating legislators. Voter education, and holding trainings and workshops. Voter education, sorry about this slide, is anything from educating candidates about the issues and then also encouraging citizens to vote. And then this last part around lobbying is about advocating for or against a specific piece of legislation. So there's lots of different actions that fall under this, from signing a petition to sending a letter of support, signing an op-ed, writing a letter to the editor, or holding a lobby meeting or a legislative meeting with your elected official. So to talk more about lobbying, if there are 2 points to take home with you today, it's that lobbying is just one type of advocacy. It's just one. They're not interchangeable. One is an umbrella. So advocacy is the umbrella, lobbying falls underneath. And both citizens and nonprofits can engage in both in issue advocacy and in lobbying, actually asking an elected official to vote a specific way. Got it? Got it. As a citizen, there's a lot that you can do. So in terms of direct lobbying, grassroots lobbying, and electoral advocacy, when it comes to direct lobbying, you can contact or meet with a legislator to propose a piece of legislation to tell them to vote yes or no. You can absolutely do that. It's the same thing with grassroots lobbying. If you want to make sure that your elected official hears from more people about what they should do, you can email your friends to reach out to their legislators as well. And then when it comes to elections, you can do a lot as well. You can educate candidates and voters on the issues. You can tell, and as an individual, you're a citizen, you can decide who to vote for. You can tell other people who they can vote for, or who you would like for them to vote for as an individual citizen. You can also register voters and encourage citizens to vote. So there's a lot you can do. Now notice that this slide is very similar to this slide. So there's a lot that you can also do as a nonprofit. So you can also engage in direct lobbying. So you can contact or meet a legislator to support or oppose legislation. You can also email your entire list and encourage people to reach out to their legislators on particular bills. And in terms of elections, you can do anything in elections as long as it's nonpartisan, so without favoring one candidate over the other. This is the biggest difference. So with electoral advocacy, you can educate voters on the issues through fact sheets. You can do nonpartisan voter registration and encourage citizens to vote, but you can't support, or you can't say vote for this guy over this guy. It's just all about public education. So you notice that there's a couple of little asterisks. that talks about just the limits to what nonprofits can do. So this is just the very simple explanation of this, is that as a nonprofit, because you are tax exempt, you cannot spend a substantial amount of your time influencing legislation. So what this means is that it just can't take up the majority of your work. And the very conservative approach to this is that it can't be more than 3 to 5% of your overall activities. So as an advocacy organization where this is like our work, it doesn't take up more than like 15 to 20% of our budget. So we have different IRS rules for us. We have both a 501c3 nonprofit and a 501c4, and we file all of our lobbying work under the C4. And that's like, we spend a lot of time doing that. And so for most nonprofits, even if you spent a lot of time doing this, it's not going to make up the majority of your work because there's so much other work in your program. So if you want to find out more about this, a great resource is Boulder Advocacy, and it talks all about how to measure the amount of lobbying that you're doing. So that's it. As a nonprofit, you can do it. It just can't be all of what you do. And then in terms of elections, there's just a couple more rules around what nonprofits can do. So this is more about what you cannot do as a nonprofit when it comes to elections. So you can't endorse a candidate running for office. You can't make any campaign contributions to them as a nonprofit. You can as an individual, obviously. And this includes in-kind. So if a candidate asks to hold a forum in your space, you can. They just need to pay for it. And you need to be able, what we suggest is that you offer that to all of the candidates so that it doesn't look like you're favoring one over the other. You can't ask candidates to pledge on any issue. So you can't say, like, if you're elected, will you vote this way? Because this starts to become an endorsement. So it's just being careful around that. And then publishing or communicating anything that explicitly or implicitly favors. So this is where perception really comes in. Anytime you put anything out publicly, it needs to give equal measure to all the candidates. So you have to provide the same opportunities, whether you're reaching out for a questionnaire or inviting them to a forum, doing a sit-down meeting with them, you have to treat everyone the same. So again, additional information is at boulderadvocacy.org. So we've got lots of really great examples on how to do this work. I'm sure a lot of folks have experience with us on getting one of our emails and putting in your zip code and then sending out an email to your legislator around the Mass Cultural Council budget. There's a lot you can do beyond the email. So one is just this online day of action that we do called Arts Matter Day that happens in October 2 weeks before the election. A lot of people just choose to engage online, but then there's a set of organizations that use this day and fit it into their programming. So you can see some examples here from New Bedford does this annual photo. Malden this year had a gallery opening, so they did it on Arts Matter Day and had 20 events happening in town, so lots of ways to boost that storytelling piece. Another way to just advance legislative advocacy is to come to our Arts Advocacy Day that happens every other year. So the next one will be in 2021 to meet with your legislators with hundreds of other people and just show a really big presence at the State House. You can also engage in elections. So this past fall, we worked with a set of towns who had mayoral elections, getting some great issues on the forefront, like in Somerville and Melrose. Also working on ballot initiatives. So this was a couple years ago on the transgender rights law. We did a set of op-eds with cultural leaders to say vote yes on 3. This is something else that you can do as a nonprofit is work on ballot initiatives, and you can actually say vote yes or no. So this is, I think, really exciting around issue advocacy is that you can actually take a stance. So this is a really great segue into introducing Susan Ryan-Vollmar, who works with us at MassCreative to help us get arts and culture stories in those front pages. So she'll be able to tell you more about how to take advocacy beyond the email and engaging the media.
Okay, so what I'm going to do today over the next 19 minutes and 30 seconds. This session is called Building Public Will for Culture Creativity. I'm going to talk about what that phrase actually means. I'm going to talk about how you can use media advocacy to build public will for culture and creativity. I'm going to show you examples of media advocacy by arts organizations. And the final piece of what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I have done with one very specific organization using all of the things that I will have talked about on up here. Okay, first I just want to start. Raise your hand if you feel like you have a solid understanding of what the phrase building public will for culture and creativity means. All right, anyone want to volunteer on what it means? Share with us. Anyone who raised their hand? Come on. All right, okay, go ahead.
So I think it means that we raise the consciousness of people in our general community to support advocacy or creation or creative endeavors. And that the public will creates momentum itself. When you gather a lot of people together, it can push for things that one individual can't. But you have to connect everybody together around the same idea first.
I like that definition. I'm going to be honest with you. I find that phrase hard to understand, building public will for culture and creativity. I find it jargony, and I feel like it's a violation of everything that I work with all of my clients with. Don't use jargon, because people don't understand jargon. So as I understand it, building public will for culture and creativity, it brings us to a place in society where art, culture, and creativity is just an expected part of everyday life. And even that definition that I've just given is jargony. So what does it mean if we've created a society in which art, culture, and creativity is an expected part of everyday life? It means if you're a small arts organization, working on the North Shore, let's say, you can sell your tickets. You have great community support to sell tickets to your events, and people show up. What else does it mean? It means parents who sign their kids up for art classes at the same rate as they sign them up for soccer in Russian math. I mean, I don't know where I come from, Russian math's a thing. And I don't know, maybe that's art or something. And another example of is strong support, as Tracie mentioned, for public funding of the arts. And in Massachusetts, one of the ways that happens is through the Mass Cultural Council budget. All right. So I'm going to talk about media advocacy. This is a very jargony slide, and I apologize for that. I just want to talk about what media advocacy is. It's the strategic use of mass media to shape public debate, promote social change by shaping debate, speaking directly to people within power who have influence, and applying pressure to those decision makers. An example that everyone will be familiar with of what media advocacy is, in the 2000s, the campaign to ban public smoking in public places. Opponents said it's the nanny state. People are like, businesses, no one's going to come to our bars or restaurants. As we now know, it was a wildly successful public policy move in jurisdictions in this country where there are smoking bans in place. Everybody has fewer heart attacks, whether you're a smoker or a non-smoker. So that's an example of media advocacy. So how do we apply those tactics to art, to building public will for culture and creativity? Two ways. First method is by creating news. So you can hold an event, such as a conference, such as something like this, and get the word out to the press that you're holding the event. You always have to have a message. This feels very disjointed. We could do an entire session on messaging. For the purposes of today, our message is that art matters. Okay, so you hold an event, you let people know, you talk about it. The arts community is essential to Cape Cod. That's media advocacy in action. You've created news. As Tracie mentioned, you can hold meetings with lawmakers, you can hold them in your community, or an organization like MassCreative can organize this in your community, and you as an organization can attend the meeting. I'm sorry, I said that very loud. You invite the press, and again, the messaging is all arts matter. Talk about the vital role that arts, culture, and creativity play in improving our schools, strengthening the economy, building neighborhoods where people want to live, work, and play. Parents want schools with excellent arts programs because it's a sign of overall quality. It's also a sign of a wealthy community. I'm not saying that as a snarky thing. I'm just saying it as it's the truth. Another way to create news, hold an event. And again, if you don't have the capacity to hold an event, attend an event that MassCreative has organized for you. This was on the front page of the Boston Globe. It was an Arts Advocacy Day event that started, where was it, Tracie? Emerson, Paramount Theater? Yeah. And here's the Arts Matter quote: "We know that art saved lives, and we know that art makes life worth living." That's media advocacy in action. Second tactic, you can hijack the news. And this is really fun, and this is where you can be creative. So here's an article in the Globe that was about loneliness, the epidemic of loneliness. Incredibly, it didn't talk about art as a prescription for dealing with it. So you send a letter to the editor. Loneliness is a public health issue. Art and creative expression should be a part of the cure. We're building public will for culture and creativity. Okay, you were supposed to laugh. Okay, another example, some of these will overlap with what Tracie talked about. You can send op-eds. So this is an example of the Committee on Tourism, Arts, and something held a hearing on the need for more funding, two bills that dealt with the need for public funding for art. Didn't get a lot of media attention, so we just wrote an op-ed about it and submitted in it. And whenever you do an op-ed, keep your audience in mind. The audience in this case, we want to influence decision makers. So if you want to influence decision makers about what's happening on Beacon Hill, you need to look at the Boston Globe and Commonwealth Magazine. So this was in Commonwealth Magazine, talking about the economic activity generated by art. Another example of using an op-ed. This was around creative placemaking and, talking about why do we engage in art? It makes where we are beautiful, nourishes ourselves. Again, hijacking the news. This was an example when the Trump administration for the third year in a row submitted a budget with zero money for the NEA. Easy opportunity to hijack the news with an op-ed. Again, talking about all of the benefits of art. Okay, what if you are a small nonprofit arts organization on the North Shore and your goal is really about selling tickets? How does that fold into, or if it's not your goal, someone's shaking their head. No what?
That's never the goal.
That's never the goal?
Never the goal. It's the byproduct.
You have just hijacked my presentation. All right. I'm just going to show you how an arts organization that I've worked with for a while, the Boston Gay Men's Chorus in Boston, has used all of these tactics to build public will for culture and creativity. How does the BGMC get attention? I'm going to use the example of its most recent show, which was, it's a holiday show called the Super Gay Christmas. Everything BGMC does is super gay because it is in fact gay. So everything's super gay, but that was the theme of this year's concert, so you emphasize your theme. You have your message, you emphasize it everywhere. You get mentioned, you send it out. I am presuming that people know how to write a press release and send it out. That is not meant to be dismissive or anything. It's just a basic foundational thing. If you have questions about those basic foundational activities, I'm happy to answer them too. So you have your press release about your show, you send it out. Boston.com list, in the Globe as an editor's pick, WBR's Artery, another editor's pick for holiday shows, Metro West Daily News, Patriot Ledger. That's not the sum of what you can do. You could get creative. Today's media environment is very understaffed and under-resourced. Create your own content. In this case, we did a Q&A with the music director. It was published pretty much unchanged in local publications. The Rainbow Times is a publication that covers the queer community throughout New England. And it was published, and of course the messaging throughout is all about how much fun you're going to have at the show, but also, you know, arts matter. And then, of course, you use it on social media. You can have fun with social media. This is a time-lapse video we did of the tech rehearsal. And John's going to talk much more about social media. The way I work with my clients, all media outreach and social media are inextricably linked. What else can you do? This was for a show, I can't remember which year, I think it was last spring. It was focused on music of ABBA. We, you know, send the press release out and send it out to news organizations that do live streams on their social media accounts. So in this case, Boston.com sent a reporter, and they did a live stream of a rehearsal, got almost 30,000 views on Facebook. And that's another way of generating attention. Yet another way, send letters to the editor. A lot of arts organizations, as Tracie alluded to, have a fear of engaging in political advocacy. But for an arts organization like the Boston Gay Men's Chorus, which is, you know, gay choruses were founded in this country after a political assassination of Harvey Milk in 1978. If you're a queer person, you walk out the door, you're committing an act of political resistance. If you are Black, if you are trans, genderqueer, Latin, Asian, etc. So the idea, and I don't mean to exclude the straight white men, whatever, but the idea that an arts organization cannot comment on political things, I think, is nuts. So this was a letter in response to the death of George H.W. Bush that completely, you know, didn't talk at all about the role that he had played in ignoring AIDS. So here it is, sends the letter to the editor, and again, the message always comes through. Continue to tell the stories of LGBTQ people, which is what BGMC does through its song. It shares stories. Another example, we've fallen far from commenting on AIDS. When Patriots were in the Super Bowl, where was this? Philadelphia. I can't remember which year it was, but so we did a challenge, you know, with the Philadelphia Gay Men's Chorus. You know, if the Pats win, you have to sing a song about Boston and share it on YouTube. If the Eagles win, which is what happened that year, we have to sing and do that. You know, had a lot of fun with that. We did the same thing with the LA Rams. What else did we do? Okay, the Boston Gay Men's Chorus has done 3 international tours. This tour was in the Middle East, 2015. We got a ton of coverage because the Turkish government basically told a high-end performance venue that they could not have us and host us, which was fabulous for media coverage. So we did all of that, and but we didn't just end it. We came back and talked about why it mattered. You know, why did we do this? I think I'm completely disorganized now. All right, this must be from the op-ed. You know, life-changing experience for us and for our straight allies. This is part of the op-ed. Sorry, 5,000 people ended up showing up for the makeshift thing that they put together on the fly after they were kicked out of the Zorlo Performance Center. I think that's the end of my presentation. So just the tips that I want to give you. Follow the news. You can't hijack the news if you aren't following the news. Okay, that's a basic. And there are ways to do that. You can set up Google alerts. I mean, you will be overwhelmed. You need to kind of narrow and target what you want to be following, but the issues that you care about, follow it. My background, which I didn't talk about before, I've been doing this business consulting for about 10 years now. Prior to that, I was a journalist, worked at the Boston Phoenix, where we broke the story on the clergy sex abuse stuff. I worked at Bay Windows, where we led media coverage on the marriage equality battle. I speak from experience that reporters and editors rarely hear positive things from the public. We get death threats. Even back then, I got death threats at Bay Windows. It was, so send a nice note. That is how you will stand out. And it needs to be authentic. If somebody has written something that you like, shoot them an email saying, hey, nice work. Trust me, you will be alone in doing that, unless everybody here does it. But and build your media list. This is a simple thing. People think media list, ooh. Just open a spreadsheet. If you are reading the news, you know who the local people are in your community who are writing about your organization and people like you. I just thought timing. Make a note. Get their contact info. If they have written a piece that you like, put it in your notes. If you've sent them a nice email, put it in your notes so you can keep track of this. This may be more important for somebody like me who does this for a living than it is for you, but I do think it's something that's worth doing if you have the time to do it. Yes?
Is that something this overarching organization can take on? Because I once got kind of a press release, the outstanding organization that sent it, instead of putting all their contacts in the blind CC, as they usually did, they came in the CC, and I captured that, and I used that, and now it's totally out of date. And it's hard for me to keep it up because everybody's doing the same work in their own little office. Is that something that ECCF in conversation can consider, sort of creating a master public relations outreach for arts organizations? Because Essex County is small, the players aren't infinite.
Before you answer, Karen, that's a question for Karen to answer. However, when somebody makes the mistake of not using the BCC line, capture that information. It's a ninja tactic. Don't let that opportunity go. Number two, it's not just in Essex County. It's everywhere, the turnover, it's bananas. So you really do have to pay attention. But Karen can answer the question of a larger list.
Yeah. The answer to everything at this point in our trajectory with Creative County Initiative is yes. We just need to find the right partners to be able to, carry it through and make things happen. So it's a tough one, though. It's keeping up to date on all this. I get it. So let's think about who the right partners are for that. We can help. Yes. You want to say the first one?
We're in trouble.
All right, that's it. And I have 1 minute and 30 seconds. Oh, so I can answer your question.
My name's Rita, and I'm wondering, you talk a lot about the news. A couple of years ago, I used to follow the news a lot.
Yep.
Until a lot of the political stuff started happening, and then it got to a point where it was like, I can't even watch this stuff anymore.
Yeah.
I can't read it, I can't watch it, I can't read the newspaper. What can you recommend for people who have pulled the plug and that you want to engage them in something other than politics?
Yeah.
Because that's all anybody wants to talk about.
Yeah.
And everything else went by the wayside. And so people who are struggling, independent artists and what have you, they really had to make themselves super relevant. And even then, it's a struggle. It's a super struggle. So I wonder what you have to say about, how do you circumvent all of this negative politics, media attention that's happening, and get people focused on local things that are good and that they can contribute to and all of that stuff?
I have a couple of things to say about that. Number one, if we could get people to focus on local things that are good, we would have solved all of our problems. The second thing, my svelte figure, 2016, stress eating. I could not ignore the news because this is what I do for a living, and I'm hoping to lose the 35 pounds I gained. I'm saying that, nope, everyone looks like stricken. I can't believe she's talking about her weight. It's a common thing. I think so many of us were traumatized and have had a hard time and have pulled the plug, as you put it. You don't have to pay attention to political news. You don't have to comment on political news. When I say paying attention to the news, you can pay attention to, the first thing I would urge you is pay attention to your local publications and to the opinion pages of your local publications. A lot of them will be publishing political takes in your opinion page. A lot of them won't be. A lot of them will be talking about other things, including arts and culture, education, climate change. I mean, it's hard to leave the house. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think you're alone. And be very judicious with your Google alerts. Like, you can, if there are things that you can pay attention to, whether it's like a couple years ago, the whole loneliness epidemic thing was a thing. You know, you can set up Google alerts around that and decide, all right, every time, somebody published something about loneliness, I'm sending out my letter talking about how investing in local community arts organizations that bring people together, that's a prescription for loneliness. This feels like a very disjointed answer, but that's, yeah. Yes?
Time for questions. This may be a very basic question, and a lot of folks already know how to do it. How do you make inroads with a publication that you can't seem to get traction with? There are publications in our community that I feel like it would be such a great fit for us, but I can't seem to get a foot in the door. And how do I go about starting them?
Do you have a specific publication in mind? Say it again. Oh. Yes, go ahead. That's the answer. That's the answer. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to talk to you too.
One person who's really supportive of arts and culture that I can connect you with, and he loves to do stories.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
A lot of the questions may be answerable by our other panelists as well. So why don't we do a long Q&A at the end after the next two? So if that's okay.
Thank you so much.
So I want to introduce John Andrews. He is working with us at Creative County Initiative. He's on our steering committee. He's also been managing the EssexCountyCreates.org website and calendar for us for the last 2 years. And he's the founder and owner of Creative Collective, LLC. John?
Hi. So unapologetically nervous because I don't really like speaking in public. However, I'm saying this for one reason. I'm going to introduce tactics and tools and tricks that you may not have used. What we do matters. What we do is critical. What we do makes the world better, period, end of story. So we work through those nerves and we just kind of do it. The Q&A kind of threw off my vibe, so I'm just going to move forward. Just because there's so many questions that I want to answer that were asked. So I took this step a little back and wanted to show you some tools. How many people think that they know what the top 5 social media tools are? So that's like 4 people. So obviously we have challenges here. So I'm not going to take a ton of time on it, but I do want to show you some of the basics. And one of the things that I did, that's just a basic definition for what social media is. It's really interesting because listening to everything we just talked about, social media actually can put you directly in touch with a lot of these people. It can put you in touch with the advocates. It can put you in touch with your community. It can put you in touch with your consumers pretty directly. You can actually talk to humans. When you put out a press release, when you put out a lot of this stuff, you don't necessarily get a chance to talk to humans. So we found in our organization that we can have a lot of direct one-on-one dialogue with the people that do make decisions and the people that can get you in front of larger media. There's a ton of options. Like a ton of options. I just want you to take a quick second and look at the users. This is all current data. This is all real. There's a lot of people there that buy tickets to shows. There's a lot of people there that would sponsor your events. There's a lot of people there that would show up. Sometimes showing up is critical. Sometimes showing up for a lot of artists is more important than even selling something. It's just being there and being present and being supportive. So you can do more research on all these tools. I will say, same thing with Google Alerts. Google is your best friend. Just be careful. Find who you trust or ask one of your peers who they trust to go to. We have a handful of websites that we use, and that's what we stick with. Even more options. Again, billions of users, billions of humans, billions of eyes. Some of these things are way beyond the stretch of what you want to do, but some of them may not be. And some of you do more with advocacy than wanting to sell tickets necessarily. So a lot of these tools are kind of important. And there are organizations such as mine and other organizations that can help you navigate this space to give you the best practices and tools. And I know Karen's going to also talk about extending these sessions and giving more one-on-one help. And there's even more. So there are not a lack of options as far as things you can use and tools you can use. The tough thing about all of us is everything we do is very different. We all think outside the box. That's what makes us awesome. However, that also makes it really hard to work with a lot of you at the same time. We currently represent over 200 small businesses that all live in the creative space somehow. Almost every single one of them has unique and different needs. You can imagine what that feels like. But they're all doing amazing things. So strategy is critical. You can throw out social media. You can say, I'm going to do social media. You can log into Instagram. You can post stuff. But if you don't have a strategy, you're going to get lost. So, you know, setting, and these are all, the one thing about social media that you will learn, it's really basic. It's really logic. If you use logic, a lot of this stuff just makes sense. Why would you go into anything without a goal? But how many people log on to social media and don't have a goal when they make a post? So there's a lot of really basic stuff here. So it's kind of just taking a step back. How can social media help you achieve your business goals? You're all businesses. You may be nonprofits, you may be for-profits. I live in a certain space where I play with both. But at the end of the day, you need to sustain. You're not going to be able to share the things that you do with the world if you can't sustain. The days of arts for art's sake aren't really there anymore. You still need to pay for your health insurance. You still need to pay for your brushes and details. And there's a lot of things that come with that piece of it. We just looked at social media platforms. Which ones are going to work for you the best? How do you use them? How do you engage with them? And then what type of content do you want to share? It's all over the place. You need to figure out what works best for you. You need to figure out what you're trying to get out there and what you're trying to accomplish. If you know your goal, then it will help you answer what type of content you want to share. So there's some just basics, and I'm going to have a few examples too, but I just wanted to get people caught up because I saw, especially in the last presentation, a lot of social media stuff, but if you don't know what that means, then you don't know what to do with it. Again, find your voice. What is your individual organization's theme, tone? What do you want people to know about you? Consistent messaging is hugely critical. The Boston Gay Men's Chorus, the way that went was super consistent across all the platforms. That was a great segue. So I was happy when you were doing it. Authentic content, again, great example. The videos that you showed were not highly produced. They were somebody showing up with their phone. There's a reporter in Salem at Salem News that literally shows up with his little Android and does videos, and he gets viral when he does October and things that matter. And you don't have to have a huge budget. You don't have to spend a ton of money on advertising. Just create something. Put it out there, and put it out there in the tone that you want to put it out in. Be willing to change. These things change all the time. Where people are paying attention to changes all the time. What type of, to that, was it, no, in the back, the question about, filtering things out. Well, you're not alone, and so people are filtering things out. So where is your audience going to live? I know for me, Facebook has become super frustrating because of that stuff. However, it's a tool I have to use. But because I engage with so much creative advocacy work, the algorithms have switched my feed, and it's not as bad anymore. So engage with stuff you want to engage with. Share stuff you want to share. If you engage more with that type of stuff, your algorithms will change. Algorithm, if you don't know, is kind of the back end magic that Facebook and Google and all those use to show you what they show you. Use your creativity. This is critical. You all make amazing things, and then you don't use it to sell yourself. So that doesn't make any sense. Use those tools. I would one of the things that I would love to see more in 2020 is artists and creatives using more of their talents and skills to work on this advocacy piece. Arts Matter is a great example, but it's not necessarily just the graphic that you guys print out. It's all the other things that people make that then splash Arts Matter across. Whether it's somebody singing, whether it's somebody make stuff and talk about why all this matters. We're not doing enough of that, I don't feel. We're really, really concerned about the projects that we're working on, and I totally get that. We all have to fund them. We all have to get them done. But if we took 1% of what we do and talked about the bigger picture, this would really be a lot easier for all of us. So authentic content is the trend for 2020. And what authentic content is just kind of being yourself. Not overproducing, talking about your mission, talking about what you do, talking about why what you do matters, and doing it in a very authentic fashion. A couple examples here. The chef from Ledger with his phone doing some videos of the music. Well, the music drives an audience. The music helps them with sales. That matters, and the artist gets paid. Salem Style is a local influencer, and she also is a maker. And she's really, really, really grown her brand to an exponential level, and she sells a lot of products because she's herself. That's about it. Her stuff's great, and she's herself. The bottom left, North Shore Music Theater has some of the best authentic content in their social media when they're in show. So when they're in show, pay attention to their content. They let all of their actors and actresses do takeovers. You get to know the cast. Of course you're going to want to engage with that. Of course you're like, I want to go see them now because I know them. Behind the scenes stuff is super easy. People are interested in that. People are interested in finding how you got to where you are. Backstage is cool. People really dig that. And the other thing too is by increasing the capital in the humans behind this, it's going to help you increase the capital in general. So if we tend to use social media for sponsor thank yous. And they really enjoy that. So we work with Salem 5 Bank. Salem 5 Bank, their social media is totally locked down. They have a system, they have a plan, they can only do so much. So we know, because they're a partner of ours, when we go to festivals, when we go to art shows, when they're represented or one of their humans is there represented, we'll make sure to tag them. Now all of a sudden they're like, oh, somebody is paying attention. I will critically stress that engagement is a two-way street. It is a two-way street. You cannot just put stuff out and expect to get stuff back. You have to play better, interact with the players, get to know them, to solve the issue of changing, not knowing who to talk to. almost all of the bigger players, you can find the reporters, you can find the photographers, you can find all of them on social media. So there's a really interesting way, and I've been noticing this. Carl Stevens from BZ has been showing up at a ton of North Shore events. And it's not stuff that necessarily lives on BZ directly, but you can get access to Carl Stevens through his Twitter account. So he's got hundreds of thousands of followers. He's super well known, and he happens to love arts and culture on the North Shore. Well, I don't have access to WBZ. I'm too small for that. But I have access to the guy that's going to do the piece. So there's different ways to go around this. I'd be curious, look stuff up. If you have peers, if you have people that you love what they're doing, if you're a small theater company and you know a big theater company, if you're a small artist and you know an artist that's an influencer, copy them. What they're doing is working. There's no reason that you can't use that as best practices for yourself. More details, hashtags, direct messaging, tagging, all of those things, those are all tools that you can use. I constantly go on Google and say best practices for theater groups and social media. And then if I know any of the top 5 results come from one of the organizations that I trust, because there is a lot of fake stuff out there, we all know that. Some of it is not good advice. But when you find that one website that you're like, this worked for me, always go back to them. So there's a few different terms here again. If you don't know them, look them up. Hashtags are a really great tool that you can use. Handles is just what somebody's called. If you don't know these things, your social media game needs help. So get on this. Ephemeral content is really popular this year as well, which is stories, things that go away after 24 hours. The authentic content really matters there. You can get away with doing stuff that's super behind the scenes. And you know, if you look at a few years ago when I think it was Ellen did the selfie at that went super crazy viral. Even more viral than the professional photographer's photo. So she just went and did that. So ephemeral content, things that have a short but potent shelf life. So this is just an example of how a hashtag works. We use the Essex County Creates hashtag on everything we do. We suggest that everybody uses it on everything we do. I will explain to you why it matters. Because one of the things we're working on in 2020 is capacity and why it all matters. So 5,346 posts. Now, a lot of those are me, self-admittedly. A lot of people in this room have actively used them. Where it's an interesting piece is I can now talk to a sponsor and I can say that 5,000 people are attracted and use and actively engage with these posts. Now I can attach said sponsor to future posts. So now they're automatically looking at those numbers. 5,000 people is a lot of people. That's a lot of eyeballs. And mostly the people that are going to write you these sponsor checks don't really get how it works. So just throw big numbers at them and show them big numbers and they're going to like it. It's just true. You know, you guys, arts matter. I mean, why? Why do that? Because of stuff like this. I mean, it's a great curation point. You can use it in broad terms. You can do hashtag art and get millions of things, or you can do it super specific. If you did hashtag Peabody MA, you'd probably find something from here today. So you can get it as specific as you want. It's a great tool for if you want exposure out there about events and you know that your people are social media friendly, suggest a hashtag to them. All this is work, and it takes a lot of work, and there are tools that can help you. A couple of these we actively use. We're a big fan of Later. We use Later for our Instagram posting because we manage quite a few accounts. All of these are readily available online. Some of them are free, some of them are not. Some of them have free options, some of them don't. It's capacity is tough. I mean, some of you are one-person organizations, and I'm throwing a lot of stuff out there that you can and can't do. I have a full-time marketing manager. She's here. I mean, we couldn't do it all ourselves. So we also need the help of some of these tools. So just some, I mean, this breaks it down a little bit more scientific. Things that we do to engage with people. I mean, this was just me with my iPhone at the museum. There was nothing fancy about it, but it got really healthy engagement. It got the museum aware of it. It got North of Boston aware of it. It got the Salem News aware of it. The artist himself reached out, which was wonderful. So this is just one post. So it's very, very, very doable. If you want people to care, if you want them to engage, give them things to engage with. Same thing, completely unrelated, but there's the entire world where, you know, we tend to talk, this seemed to be a lot more about traditional media and traditional media through social media, but influencers are a thing. Look up the word social media influencers. I'm actually pretty frustrated that there aren't more in the arts and culture space. It's something that we can incentivize. Another way to offset the negativity in the media, blast them with all of our stuff as much as humanly possible. Get it out there, but give them a reason why. Don't just share it to share it. This matters because. You should run this because. So always just making sure, do you know the relevant players? Taking a little time to work with the relevant players. I know from the switch and watching some of your social media, you know who to tag, and then it shows up. So that kind of matters. Facebook, very similar. All of these tools work slightly different, but there's a general theme here of engage and share. Engage and share, and know the players that you should be mentioning and talking to. You know, from a Wall Street Journal piece. Now, you would think Wall Street Journal may not care. Well, you know what? If Wall Street Journal sees a huge boost in their analytics from the North Shore, their eyes are now on the North Shore because they need views. They need to sell these things. We've seen this happen in Salem with Food and Wine Magazine. If you put a lot of attention and you get a lot of eyeballs, and all of a sudden a reporter is like, wow, that really worked. And he talks to his editor. That editor is now like, is there more stories there? You may be one of those stories. Share. My frustration with the Essex County Creates calendar is everybody uses Facebook for events, so why do you need another one? Well, we do, because Facebook could change, and it does change constantly. They change their algorithms constantly. They tweak how they work constantly. There is no control on our end of any of that. So having a calendar platform that we can monitor and capitalize on, even if we don't love it all the time, we're working on it. We're trying to make it more simple. We're trying to integrate it with Facebook. There are things we're trying to do. But use your networks to share the good word. So there's Carl Stevens. So same thing, MassCreative getting retweeted by Patronicity and Mass Development. You can see the circle there. Those people are paying attention. Now that showed up on my feed just like that. So now I'm aware of it. So there are a lot of ways to do this. Don't go crazy because it will take out way too much of your time, but find out a handful of things that work really well for you and do them really well. Ways to connect, obviously I had to shamelessly plug our networks because this is what we're talking about. The same thing with what I said earlier, show up, be present, engage, talk to people, communicate to people. If you see an artist and you really like what they do, comment on their post. If you see something from Boston Gay Men's Choir, comment. Let them know that you're there. Let them know that you see them. That is another thing that happens a lot. You don't feel seen, regardless of what category you want to fall in. As artists and creatives, I hear a lot of. We just had a friend of ours who passed away, local artist, and he just really didn't feel heard. He didn't feel seen. He couldn't sell his work. He was having a really hard time. The holidays hit, some personal stuff, and let people know that you're paying attention. Let people know that you care. Take 2 minutes out of your day every day and just go on Instagram and say, love your work. It makes a difference. That will lead to sales. That will lead to all these other things. But, I don't necessarily agree that it's not just about ticket sales, but the concept, the principle of sharing the word. There's free tools out here that you can use. Sharing the word, supporting. The louder our voice can be collectively, the better. If everybody in this room took a half hour over the next month and just advocated, whether it's the way Tracie's asking us to, whether it's through traditional media, whether it's through social media, that is the way to build public will, because what we do does matter. I didn't time myself.
That was awesome, John. You don't have to be nervous at all. In the future, you are our go-to speaker from now on. Okay, Peter's going to talk about a little bit about his background, but we just recently met. We are both on the MassCreative's Leadership Council. Oh my God. And we just met at a retreat recently. Peter's got a great background in media and branding and marketing and all of this stuff, and he's going to talk about going outside the box. Oh, and you don't have any slides?
Oh, no.
Right, it's just you.
It's just me. No slides. No slides. What's interesting is, to give you a quick background, grew up in Connecticut, schooled in Boston at Emerson, decided to get my master's in New York, and up until 2 years ago have been there working both professionally and personally in building my life and my community. Moved up here 2 years ago and are really excited about events such as this, about MassCreative, Essex County, and because this is where it really does happen. I had the great good fortune over my career in New York to work with a lot of national and international organizations. That's done. What I'm interested in right now is where it really happens, where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. If somebody's going to say, in my tag in my email, it says communications curator for brand and identity advancement. Now, what the hell does that mean? Basically, in short, if anybody asks me what I do, I basically say I'm a storyteller. I tell a good story. Now, in order to get a good story, you need to have a strong narrative. And what I'm going to be talking about is basically how to really try to identify the narrative or explore the narrative in your organizations or in your work in order to basically utilize what Susan and John has done, and that is take that story, take that narrative, and push it out there within the world itself. I do have a tool, though, or whatever, just to let you know. The New York Times, just to give you an idea. All the news that's fit to print, it's always been up here. For the longest time, the New York Times has considered themselves the paper of record. Now, what does that mean? That they judiciously cover everything that happens. Well, they can no longer call themselves the paper of record, simply because at one time they used to cover all movies that opened in New York were covered. If anybody knows, if a movie is considered for an Oscar, it has to be shown in New York or LA. News folks, New York Times announced a few years ago, they're not going to review every movie that opens in New York. The other thing is, to give you an idea, is the weekend sections of the New York Times now comes in two parts. One is the performing arts, one is the visual arts. To give you an example, this past Friday, these two sections, 22 pages, of which 9.5 were advertising. Okay? So you have 10 pages in a city of 8 million people covering the arts, and that includes pop music, television, and film. And also now, with all the content that's being pushed out in terms of Netflix, Hulu, all the content providers. So basically, where are we at in terms of cultural coverage in this world? And the element is that there is very little. That pool is shrinking. So in order to do something, notes, you have to basically start thinking out of the box. And you really have to start thinking about what is your story? What is your narrative? You really have to examine what is the element that you're handling, you're dealing with. What are the specifics about it? What are the characteristics about it? And when you do that, your story actually can expand from just being a cultural story. And what I'm going to go through are certain examples of, as I like to call it, and it's been referred to, legacy media, meaning print, yes, online, digital, but in those terms, how to take your story, which is a cultural story, and to take that story out of that well in whatever outlet or media outlet you work with, and try to place it in another area that will also increase eyeballs. One interesting thing just to let you know, and that is the Times yesterday did a story on population growth by states in the last decade. Massachusetts was the largest in terms of 5% growth. It led all other 49 states, and a majority of that, they said, was millennials and immigrants coming with high skill sets because of the tech industry and everything within the area. Those are potentially new audiences for you. They might not necessarily have the traditional arts background or coverage or exposure. So how do you communicate to them? Where do they go in order to look for their news? Not necessarily on the culture pages. So let's start with certain segments within the traditional news wells in a publication. And I'll give you an example of how my work has taken the project or the assignment I had and try to fit it into those other sections outside of the cultural pages. Let's do business. An interesting thing, I was working with Theater Forward in New York, which is a service organization for theaters across America. And they commissioned a survey. And the survey was interesting because it polled CEOs, C-suite executives on the value of arts exposure and participation growing up and how that affects skill set development in a competitive workforce. Because of the fact is that what they determined, and that is that new figures came out about these individuals that said, because I participated in the arts, or because I went to an arts event, that taught me certain skill sets that now I apply in my business situation to become competitive within the workforce. Interpersonal relationships, I mean, the list goes on. I will distribute and give you the survey findings because there's some juicy facts and figures in there that you can use in order to advocate the reason for why should we care. Lifestyle. There's always a lifestyle section within most publications or most online elements. When I was working down with the Lincoln Center Festival, there was one event that Deborah Voigt, the opera singer, was performing. Now, what she was doing was nothing new. The performance that she was giving was nothing new, so it wasn't news. And the root of news is new, and that's what the culture section was going to do. I realized they wanted, Lincoln Center wanted exposure for this event. In order to do that, I had to think outside the box. So I actually sat down with Deborah Voigt and just started asking her questions. What are you into? What do you do? What's your background or whatever? Lo and behold, what I discovered was Deborah Voigt was into fly fishing. Like, who in the hell would know that Deborah Voigt was an expert fly fisher? And what was interesting about that was I took that information and I came up and went to the style section of the New York Times and talked to a reporter. I said, wouldn't it be cool to have one of your reporters go fly fishing with Deborah Voigt and do a Q&A and just hanging out because, again, it's new. you've never thought of this woman within that way. But I wouldn't have been able to do that story if I didn't sit down and really have the dialogue with that artist. And I think that's important to know, that whatever event you're doing, whatever artistic event that might be coming in or that you're producing, you really need to know what that narrative and what that storyline is in order to potentially go outside the box. The sports section, believe it or not, is actually a very good section to go into. I was working with the Muhammad Ali Center for Tolerance, and it was at the stage in which they were still trying to raise funds for the organization. So they needed to get traction and exposure and awareness in order to help with their fundraising efforts. So what happened was, they were thinking, oh, we are going to talk to the cultural editors and the cultural writers. And I go, wait a minute, no. He already has a footprint within the sports industry. Why not go to the sports editors and the sports writers and sit down to talk to him directly about why he's doing this center, what's the role of the programming and the nature of things within his desire to build this cultural center in his hometown. And out of that, there were a series of articles that were not on the culture pages, even though this was a cultural event. They ended up on the sports page. And what that did was, it got what he was doing in front of the audience that were not cultural individuals that would probably never hear about this organization, but now it was on their radar screen. Within 6 months, they were able to raise over $1 million more than anticipated, solely because new eyes and new eyeballs were looking at this in a certain point of view. Op-eds were mentioned before, which are really quite incredible. My exposure and my work with them has been in actually working with an individual or an organization when it came to actually crafting what that message is. When you look at op-eds from a certain point of view, it's opinionated editorial. So, they fall into two categories, one of which is, do you have an issue that is driving the current narrative or the current story that you as an expert, whoever that might be within your organization or whatever, that has expertise in that area that people will pay attention to. To give you an example, most recently, it's still not activated, but this is something in process. I worked with the Boston Symphony Orchestra on their new facility and programmatic initiative at Tanglewood this past summer. To tie that whole up, the Tanglewood Learning Institute was a directive of the BSO moving forward that they wanted to get more attention to for its validity and its purpose. So we came up with an op-ed saying, looking at what is the Tanglewood Learning Institute all about? It's about lifelong learning. What is the value of lifelong learning? Well, we did a lot of research and the statistics are incredible to learn. So how do we do this? Well, we have opinionated people with a great following in order to be the signatures on the op-ed itself. So we have Mark Volpe, the CEO, talking from a level of authority, and somebody that editorial editors are going to listen to, John Williams. We're going to be timing this to the Oscars coming up. It's a timely fashion because we tie in the nature of certain elements in the film industry to the notion of lifelong learning. Again, we wouldn't have been able to do this if it wasn't for the fact of going and looking and seeing, how do we get this message out of this institution or this program beyond the traditional cultural pages? And we came up with that. General news, we mentioned about trying to get culture moved to the front pages in terms of elements. Well, in order to do that, some of my most fascinating works have been in making cultural policy part of public policy. And what is interesting is working with the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust was a nonprofit organization that was in downtown Pittsburgh that was not only doing programmatic elements, but also design infusion within the district in terms of public art, road curbing, new facilities for the arts community there. What was fascinating is that they didn't have the strength and the knowledge from the local community to support this element itself. So in engaging with those leaderships and actually doing briefings one-on-one with the individuals of the Cultural Trust, and then bringing all that to New York to brief the media on Pittsburgh because of the fact of it was really a critical mass of 5 or 6 projects. Over time, the newspaper and the public and governmental leadership became supporters of the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust. And insofar as what happened was there were a series of page-one articles in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette supporting the elements of the trust, and it also changed the nature of how public construction projects in Pittsburgh were going to be viewed, and not just ad hoc, but they were going to do design competitions because they saw that the trust was elevating the profile of the community through good design. And it was through those efforts that influenced the local government in viewing future public projects and using a great design process to elevate the profile of Pittsburgh. Finally, the last one is you have to think of trend stories. What is currently popular within the marketplace, and how can you cycle in becoming part of a trend story? Trends usually happen in threes. So if you're one, and you can find 2 other organizations or 2 other elements that have a likeness, that share a characteristic, you can bundle that together and promote that as a single idea or entity in order to get a job and the media to pay attention to. For example, using the same example of Tanglewood and the BSO. And it was only through research that I came up with and realized that 50 years ago, just a few days before Woodstock, The Who played Tanglewood to the largest crowd that they ever had, over 22,000 people. And then I went, okay, we have Woodstock anniversary coming up, which I knew was going to get a lot of attention. Tanglewood is about music festivals, gathering of people, communal experience. Woodstock, same way. What's the third one? Coachella. Same thing, gathering in a non-urban area, bringing them together. So I proposed to the New York Times doing not an editorial, but a reason of what is it about communal experiences in the arts that changes or makes people do certain things, and to tag it to the 50th anniversary of Woodstock, but do it in a visual representation. Because I think my 2 other speakers along is that visual is so much more important these days. If you look at any traditional outlet, and of course a lot of the social media platforms, they're not driven necessarily by word, but by a strong visual. So the Times ended up doing a 2-page spread, taking that and other festivals, and did it from a visual point of view. So what did it happen? It took the BSO, and we were able to associate them with great history and current popular entertainment culture. So it is, again, trying to anticipate the notion that Tanglewood is for everyone, that you can go there and have a communal experience for less than it cost to take a family to the movies. Kids under 17 were free. The grounds are open free up until 4 o'clock. A lawn pass is only $12. So taking all of those elements and not treating it as a cultural story, but as a personal family experience got a lot more mileage this summer in profiling Tanglewood as not a snooty or, elitist kind of an operation, but more of a communal element itself. That's about it in terms of it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Peter, and everybody else for speaking with us. Now, there's plenty of time. We have, it's 10:35, so we have 25 minutes for your questions, your issues, and for these folks to address some of those. So let's take advantage of the last 25 minutes or so. And again, take the survey that I'll send out later this afternoon and express your interest or not in doing a follow-on session as we schedule it later this spring. So questions or answers, and if the speakers, your three folks could maybe come up here so that you're, facing, and Tracie too. Tracie, they may have questions for MassCreative. Come on up and, yes, Peter, Paul.
One of the most challenging efforts that we make is to measure the results of all of this work. Placements in traditional media, placements in social media, beyond likes and followers and movement in those metrics, beyond that, has anybody cracked the code in terms of measuring the effectiveness of all these efforts and these hours spent in this work?
No. We're working on it. We in the Creative County Steering Committee, the question of why comes up constantly. How do we prove the why? How do we prove why it matters? But I wanted to use your example just to clarify that it does. So if you look at something like Tanglewood, and that was a great story, but it mattered to the people that were there. It mattered to the community around them. It also would have mattered to the sponsors that saw that in a national publication, which does prove a value proposition for them. They would be way more incentivized to write another check next year or to write a bigger check next year because now there's national media coverage involved with that. So you kind of got to just view it in that scope. As far as like data and like spreadsheets and like, no, I think it's just a clear no, we haven't figured that out yet.
Oh, go ahead.
It's interesting. Being in the communications, PR, whatever you want to call it, business all my life, unfortunately, the ephemeral nature of matrix and measuring success is far more murky than, say, if I was a marketing person, because I could say that I spent X on brochures, ads, or whatever, and I saw the result in box office. It's very hard to judge the results, but you will know in terms of, are you getting a greater response from, say, donors, perhaps, and that doesn't mean necessarily a written check immediately, but maybe you're getting through the door to have that conversation in order to create that step to lead towards a donation. Maybe ticket sales are coming up, and maybe you see an uptick in terms of that. You can't really measure it, and I think my compatriots here would agree, it's always changing. It's fluid. You never know, and anyone that tells you that they know that they have the answer, again, is giving you a misnomer. It's just you have to be aware of it and keep the flow going.
Oh, okay. I'm going to give you a misnomer. That's a joke. A joke. I have an answer. It's very hard to measure all the loosey-goosey building public will to create culture and creativity. What you can measure, if you are trying to sell tickets, okay, which we have already agreed is part of our larger everything, you can, not me, find somebody who can put the little things on your website that say where things come in. So I'm going to talk about the Boston Gay Men's Chorus, which recently had to push out and sell a ton of tickets for their holiday shows. You create, they know definitively how many tickets they have sold from their Facebook ads and from some of their Facebook posts. And they know where ticket sales came in from Instagram. I mean, Twitter is not a vehicle for that, although they are on Twitter. Their four primary platforms are YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And Instagram and Facebook can move tickets. So that's one thing that you can do. And if you don't know how to do it, there are people out there who do, and I would imagine you actually do. Of course you know how to do this. So ask John. So that's one way to measure. That's it.
Say one more thing.
Yeah.
Got it. Hi. So, the interesting thing about that question and the interesting thing about it in general is what people love about us is how fluid we are. What business people don't love about us is how fluid we are. I have this conversation all the time. I don't get from point A to point B. I get from point A to Z back to B. And most people in the data and the analytics, they don't get that. We solve problems just here, and we make things better just here. We create programs, we create events. The only thing you can track is that specific data of, yeah, the views don't matter, but if you're selling tickets, they matter. But it's funny, I had an investor say to me, I don't get how you work. And I'm like, do you go on Google and ask them how they work? If the results are there, they're there. Now, what I would highly suggest is capture those results. Put them in a pretty format that people can understand. We sold X amount of tickets. We've grown X amount. We've increased our donor base X amount. I would highly suggest, if you haven't seen, selfish plug, the Creative County Initiative or your end of year report. The annual report is gorgeous. It's attractive. It has all of these numbers. It has all of these facts and figures. It has the why. It has all of that. Steal the model.
And one thing in terms of there is ticket sales and there is, of course, fundraising aspects. When I was PR director of the Brooklyn Academy of Music, I worked very closely with the director of development because what she needed for her presentations was validation. And the media at that time, and still does, and the validators as individuals and institutions have a great impact, especially when it comes to funding natures. So you might not be able to measure it in terms of a ticket sale, but you're giving those tools and instruments to your development people, or if you're the development person, to show, look, we are validated. And funders like validation.
Other questions?
Come
Nothing,
on,
we
somebody
answered
ask
all
something.
your questions.
So we have a really small organization and we just started up in the last 2 years. Give me a metric, how much time should we be spending? I mean, it seems like we could do this all day long, you know, and we have full-time jobs, and so how much time should we devote?
I would go back to one of my slides. What are the goals? Just figure out what your goals are. I mean, if it's selling more tickets, then what is that, a couple hours a month? You know, or 5 hours on the month of show and maybe not on the other months. It's really going to be about the goal. If you look at it like my organization is this and I want to use all these tools, yes, it's going to be too much. And you're going to get lost in that. But if you have 2 or 3, one really strong specific goal, you know, when you need to memorize lines for a show, you know how much time you need to give yourselves for that specific piece. So figure out what you need, where you want to go with it, what the like for us, like we do different things. I want communities to buy into what we do. So I spend a certain amount of time, maybe an hour a month, going to things tagged with Peabody, Mass, things tagged with Beverly, Mass, and I interact and engage with them. Simple. But now I have an audience that is aware of our brand and our product. But I can't spend more than that. So you really have to, I mean, Katie's sitting right behind you. She's my marketing manager, and she can tell you boundaries are tough. It gets even tougher when it starts to work. because then you want to do more of it. You're like, oh, it worked this month. Maybe I should double it next month. Then you start going down that slippery slope. So pick the goals and set the boundaries right away.
As part of that in-depth workshop that we do as a follow-on from this, that would be a great exercise if someone could work with us on our goals.
Yeah, if for those of you in the back who can't hear, just as part of a follow-on session, we could maybe work on some of those individual goals. Yes. I want to flag too, Joanne Castano is here. She's with Arts Gloucester and also with the Manship Artist Residency in Gloucester. And I want to say what they're doing in their communications, it's worth going on their, is it your website or Facebook? The posts that you send, they're always posting other people's and other organizations' events. So they're building relationships all the time for their own residency programming and offerings, but they're also reaching beyond their own residency to other places and shows that relate in some way, or an organization that relates in some way, and just simply posting about that, if I get that right, Joanne, is that right? That's right. And that's just, you're now on their radar, and just what you were saying, and they're on yours.
Build the community.
Yeah.
If there's somebody that does something kind of similar in another community, work with them, collaborate with them, share each other's stuff. One of the strong points of what we try to do with our organization is we want it to feel like a community. We want you to talk about what other members are doing. We want you to, are all the arts associations talking to each other? Are all the theater companies talking to each other? They should be. So, or you supporting your local municipality and like people around you that are doing stuff. It does matter, and that does get back to, you can track public will, because people are showing up. They are engaging.
In a way, I guess the commonality among us all today is looking at it less as doing something that's a separate task. If you can look at what you're doing as just simply part of doing the work that you're doing and being part of your community, it almost makes it easier in a way, rather than thinking of a separate task that's going to take X number of hours every week by X number of people. This is more integrative. It's more of an integrative approach to it. It's like everything we all do all the time is advocacy for this work. We never stop. But it's what we love and it's what we believe in. And what you're doing in your organizations is what you love and what you believe in.
Wait,
and
Beth.
so, yeah.
Wait,
Beth,
I have a plug. Can I?
This is Beth Francis, our CEO from Essex County Community Foundation. She has to leave, but.
Hold on. One of the things I was going to say, and we do this too, and this is kind of why being on the CCI steering committee mattered. I don't know everything. I needed help. I don't know how donors work. I don't know that piece of it. I do represent nonprofits. I needed to figure that out. So will you slightly plug your board event, the nonprofit board event?
Oh, sure.
So learning how to stock your board, learning how to stock the people and the assets and the tools around you for the nonprofit specifically.
I'll do it on.
There you go. Sorry. I saw you packing up.
You could call my husband and tell him why I'm late. Okay. So what John's referring to is what's called the Institute for Trustees. How many of you have ever been to one of our Institute for Trustees? So about a quarter. It's an annual event. It's a full day. It's our dedication to nonprofit capacity building. And it's keynote speakers. Phil Buchanan is going to be speaking. And we have 20 different workshops throughout the day. So no matter if you are a very teeny tiny nonprofit, or you're a nonprofit that you are founders of, or you're a giant nonprofit that has different set of issues and challenges than a startup, there's something for you. With 20 different workshops, you can pick and choose between governance issues and finance issues and fundraising issues, which could translate to audience building issues. And so there's something for everyone, and it's going to be on March 14th. And something new this year, am I stealing your thunder? Because I think maybe you were going to talk about it. New this year, there's going to be an arts dedicated workshop, which Karen will actually, I'm assuming, wrap up with. It's one of our 5 series of capacity building workshops specifically for our Creative County initiative. So you'll want to join us in on that. You can go to ECCF.org/IFT, Institute for Trustees. ECCF.org/IFT.
Thank you, Beth.
Okay.
Thanks, Beth. Thank you, Beth. So I just one more thing to your point of like how much time do you spend? I would even wait and I would figure out where your holes are. Where are there are a ton of assets and resources out there. I mean, I've learned so much from sitting on this committee that I didn't know, and communicate with each other. One of the things that we've learned at that table is there's a lot of people working on things that can support each other and they're not necessarily communicating, so communicate. Just like the how do I get a hold of somebody in Lynn at the Lynn item, I mean, the answer's in the room, and it was just a question of asking, so.
The other element is, one, don't think that social media and digital platforms take the place of I'm going to save money or my marketing budget is cut. Because if anything, you probably are going to have to invest more time and money in order to actually activate and use those platforms wisely. One thing, less is more, and that is, I don't know if, how many people that you follow on different platforms, but people I find personally that people that post constantly, it's too much. I rather, the one side I watch that I find really fascinating that does it really well is the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They don't over supplying content, and whenever they do, it's not to sell something, it's not transactional. It's there to inform, to educate, to open up something. It's there to, what I find interesting in terms of using these tools is audiences love process. They love behind the scenes element. So if you can provide those opportunities to engage audiences, you're going to get a lot more than just saying a still image of the event that night and say, buy tickets at or whatever. I tend to turn off those organizations that don't want to have a dialogue with me, that are treating me just as a patron to buy a ticket.
Oh, I just had one more thing to add to that, which is John's absolutely right. It all all of your work has to be part of your overall plan and what is your goal, and the tactics are also incredibly important. I get this question all the time from clients, which is, how much should I be paying attention to this? And maybe, years ago, I'd be like, if you can't do it right, don't do it. Now it's critical. The media environment has changed so much. If you want people to know who you are, what you do, the impact you're making, you have to be on social media. So it does need to be incorporated into whatever your overall strategic plan is. The second thing I would say, in the way that artists are often asked to donate things or to do free things, don't give this job to an intern. Do not devalue the work of communications. That's when you're going to mess up and you're going to have to call somebody like me for crisis help, okay? So do the work professionally, and there are so many resources that can help you do that. And that's it.
I thought I saw a hand in the back. Yeah.
And maybe kind of a segue here to what Peter was saying. I guess directly related to the media itself, social media, how much is too much? Sometimes I feel like, I have a whole bunch of exhibits coming up at the gallery. Maybe I don't want to put a press release out for this one because I have a bigger thing coming up next month, and if I get an article right now, they're not going to give me any money for another 3 months.
Well, you learn to prioritize. You have to. You can't have parity across the board. It's just not possible. And in terms of prioritizing, you have to look at, again, what is your ultimate goal? Is it to increase revenue and sales? Is it to talk to a new audience that down the line is going to be important, i.e. public officials or funders? What is the objective that you're trying to get out there? And once you identify that, as we've all, I think, underscored, then you can strategically use and say, this event doesn't really need it, so I'm going to hold back and I'm going to concentrate on this next event because it'll do X, Y, and Z of what I'm trying to accomplish.
So the other thing too, and Jim, I mean, I know the audience that you deal with in Salem, there's also a lot of stuff happening at all times, so you have to figure out ways to get through that noise. A generic press release for a gallery, there's a lot of those. A generic press release for a theater show, there's a lot of those. What is the angle? What is the story? I really like the story of the fly fishing.
Oh, yeah.
Just because, what is that? I know a lot of your artists. There are stories there. Find the stories. Like make or thematically, when you're working on something and you're looking at your year schedule, what are the thematics that you're using for interesting stuff that somebody might care about? You know, I know that every single arts association, almost completely, that I've talked to says the same thing. But they're all sending the same press releases. So how are you going to, and when there is a lot of news, and honestly, the consumer is the problem, because the consumer will, the politics, the stuff we don't want to talk about, the stuff that we're trying to zone out, that's what sells papers. They have to stay in business too. So what is the story? What is the actual meat? I don't ever see generic press releases really working anymore.
I would agree with that, because if you want to go on record or have something on record, sure, that serves a purpose. But I go back to the essence of what I have done my entire professional career, and that is, what is the story? What is the narrative? Because a compelling narrative can be more than just transactional. It can be transformative in terms of its power and influence, and also its long tail.
I have a little bit of different advice, which is, you know, if you're sending out generic press releases, you're doing it wrong. No press release should ever be generic. Presumably, when you do a show, it's around a theme or an artist, or, you know, you're communicating something, and that should be in the press release. If you have the capacity, I would send a press release out for everything that you do. It's a tool. Don't expect press coverage for each press thing that you send out. I mean, but it's a way, it's an excuse, it's a legitimate excuse to have communication with an arts reporter. And I know that there aren't very many dedicated beat art reporters, but you do need a reason to communicate with them, and as long as a few of them are still there, don't pass up an opportunity to communicate. The creativity that you put into the show should also go into your press release, as I mentioned, and then carve it up. It's content for social media. The things that you have in there, the quotes, the photos, etc. So anytime you have a legitimate, authentic reason to communicate with the public, I don't think you should pass it up. So.
We have time for one more question.
That's
okay. No, it's yours.
That is for me personally. I'm an artist and an art educator. So I'm wondering, should I set up 2 social media platforms? I've been doing it all under one umbrella because I thought, I teach the kids art, I want to show that I can also make art. Or should I separate those? Because there's a whole bunch of influencers and people.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds to me, just from your brief description, that they're 2 different missions. They complement each other, and you can definitely have them work off each other. One of the things that we do in our organization, so we have 2 brands. We have Creative Collective, which is our business program, but we also have Creative North Shore, which is our way to talk to the audience. Consumer discussions and business-to-business discussions are very different in very different tones, but we use them together. So this piece might benefit this piece. We may be able to, oh, this piece needs to go in front of a larger audience, but this piece is not necessarily for a larger audience. It's more for that intimate consumer or customer that I might have. You described it really, really briefly, but as two very different feeling things. So I think you're always gonna, I personally think you would struggle keeping it under one, especially if they start growing, because then where's your audience gonna lie?
All right, to wrap up, thank you all for coming today. It's been such a great way to spend a Saturday morning for us, and thank you panelists for all bringing in your knowledge and expertise and inspiration. I do want to let you know that in your packets, there's a schedule of the rest of the capacity building workshops that we have between now and May. There's one a month. The next one is at Salem State University. It's with David Howes, who's the executive director of Arts Emerson, and he's with VP of Emerson College. He's going to be speaking on diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in the work we do. So that's going to be, and he's a wonderful, dynamic speaker. He spoke at our recent Arts Summit at the Cabot. And please sign up for that. The sign up is on the ECCF website as well. These are all free except for the one in March, which is at the Institute for Trustees that Beth mentioned. You do have to pay to come to the Institute for Trustees. There's going to be a 2.5-hour session in that on that day. Presented by Arts Midwest. And if you don't know about Arts Midwest, look it up. The representatives from there are going to be coming to present, basically taking what we have talked about today, media access and messaging, but really blowing out the messaging part of it for more impact. We've seen them present before. They presented to a group of us who are a cohort with the Bar Foundation. They came about a year or so ago, and it was just a really different, amazing way of thinking about the words we're using in our work and in our communities to reach a greater, a broader community. So please come to that. The one in April is going to be at Peabody Access. Let me see if I have this right. The one in April is going to be on capitalization. We're partnering with grant makers in the arts. That one's going to be at Peabody Essex Museum. And that is on capitalization. No matter what size your budget is, you will benefit from the way that grant makers in the arts presents this issue of what you do with your capital and how to make it best work for your mission. And it may be very, very different from the ways that we traditionally think about our money, even at any level. So it's a really fabulous one. So please sign up for that. Then the final one is going to be at Peabody Access TV right down the street. And that'll be on the nature of collaboration, thinking about how to better collaborate, how to find collaborators, and what works and maybe what doesn't in that realm of things. And that we're partnering with Springboard for the Arts on that one. So those are all free except for the Institute for Trustee. Thank you again for everyone. Yes?
So one of the things we do at the end of our networking meetings, and I just think you should do it because there's some people that aren't smiling right now, find somebody near you and high five them. Just do it. Just high five somebody. You all change the world every single day. Yeah. Know that. We see you.
Thank you so much, John. Tracie, any last words? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.